Millionaire almost sells his company for not knowing Russian. But the cook's daughter changes his fate. Richard Thompson slumped in despair as he held the pen that would change his life forever. The millionaire businessman was about to sign the papers that would hand over his import company to the Russian buyer when his hands began to tremble uncontrollably. 3 months earlier, he had lost the biggest deal of his life because he couldn't understand the Russian supplier's demands during a crucial video call. The young daughter of the cook, who was serving coffee in the meeting room, whispered something in perfect Russian to the visitor, making him smile for the first time that tense morning. "You may leave now," Richard said sharply to the girl, not even glancing her way. But the Russian buyer, a tall man with piercing eyes, raised his hand. "Wait. It would be better if she stayed. My English still isn't very good." Richard hesitated. This was the most important negotiation of his life. His company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and this sale was his only salvation. He couldn't afford risks. "She's just the cook's daughter. She's not qualified for a meeting of this level," Richard replied, trying to keep his composure. The Russian insisted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Even so, I prefer someone who speaks my language fluently. It makes business easier." During the negotiation, the girl noticed alarming discrepancies between what the Russian was saying and what Richard's lawyer was translating. Richard had hired Dr. Mitchell in a hurry after his official translator, who had worked with him for 10 years, suddenly moved to Canada without giving a convincing explanation. The young woman's name was Emily Parker. She was 22 and worked part-time helping her mother, Mrs. Dorothy, who had been the Thompson family's cook for 15 years. Emily had paused her international relations studies when her mother fell ill 2 years earlier. But she never lost her passion for languages, inherited from her Russian grandmother. As she served coffee, Emily heard the Russian quoting completely different figures from what Dr. Mitchell translated. Her heart raced when she realized the Russian contract contained clauses that would leave Richard with no control over his own creation. "Mr. Ivanov wants to speed up the process," Dr. Mitchell translated, adjusting his glasses. "He has another urgent commitment and needs us to sign today." But Emily had clearly understood the Russian saying he wanted more time to review the numbers before finalizing anything. She glanced at Richard, who seemed relieved by the supposed urgency of the buyer. During a break, Emily discreetly approached Richard in the hallway. "Mr. Thompson, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Not now, Emily. I'm in the middle of the most important deal of my life." "That's exactly why I need to talk. What Dr. Mitchell is translating isn't—" Richard cut her off abruptly. "Do you really think I'd take business advice from a girl who didn't even finish college? Dr. Mitchell has a degree in international law and speaks 5 languages. Richard's words stung deeply. Emily felt tears forming but took a deep breath. Her mother always said that good-hearted people recognize the truth, even when they don't want to hear it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Back in the room, the atmosphere was even tenser. Dr. Mitchell had spread several documents across the mahogany table Richard had bought when he founded the company 20 years earlier. "Mr. Ivanov is being very generous," Dr. Mitchell said, pointing to a specific clause. "He agrees to pay half now and half in 6 months when the transfer is complete." Richard nodded, relieved. He needed that money immediately to pay off the debts that had piled up after losing the Russian contract. But Emily, who had remained discreet in the corner of the room serving coffee, heard Ivanov say something entirely different in Russian. He was saying he would only pay 20% now, and the rest would depend on an audit he himself would control. Lunch was served by Mrs. Dorothy, who noticed the worried expression on her daughter's face. Mrs. Dorothy was a 60-year-old woman, her graying hair always tied in a perfect bun, her hands calloused from years of hard work. She had raised Emily alone after her husband abandoned them when the girl was just 5 years old. "My dear, you look pale." "Did something happen?" whispered Mrs. Dorothy as she set the table. Emily glanced around. The men were talking on the terrace, enjoying the view of the company Richard had built brick by brick. "Mum, I think the boss is being tricked. What the Russian is saying isn't what they're translating." Mrs. Dorothy grew alarmed. "My dear, you can't interfere in Mr. Thompson's business. If he finds out you're questioning his decisions, I could lose my job. It's all we have. But Mom, what if he loses everything because of a lie? That's not our problem, Emily. Our duty is to work and stay quiet. It's always been that way. Mrs. Dorothy had learned over the years not to meddle in the employer's affairs. She'd seen co-workers fired for far less. But at the same time, she had genuine affection for Richard, who had always been respectful and paid on time. During lunch, Emily overheard Dr. Mitchell speaking Russian on the phone in the bathroom, confirming he'd receive an extra $50,000 commission once the deal closed. Her blood ran cold. Dr. Mitchell wasn't just mistranslating out of incompetence, he was doing it on purpose. When they returned to the meeting room, Ivanov seemed more impatient. "I need a decision today," he said in heavily accented English. Dr. Mitchell translated quickly, but Emily noticed he left out the part where Ivanov said in Russian that his company had already used the same strategy to buy 3 other American firms for well below market value. Richard was sweating, the pressure was mounting, and he knew if he didn't sell soon, he'd have to declare bankruptcy. "Dr. Mitchell, are you sure this is a good deal?" Richard asked, showing uncertainty for the first time. "Absolutely certain. Mr. Ivanov is a respected businessman in Russia. This is your chance to leave this crisis with dignity." Emily could no longer stay silent. "Mr. Thompson, may I ask Mr. Ivanov a question?" Everyone turned to her, surprised. "What could you possibly ask that I can't answer?" Dr. Mitchell sounded irritated. Emily looked directly at Ivanov and asked in Russian, "How many American companies have you bought using this method?" Ivanov's face changed completely. He hesitated before replying, also in Russian, that he didn't understand what she was talking about. Dr. Mitchell quickly translated a completely different version. He said this is his first company in the United States, and he's very excited about the partnership. "That's not what he said," Emily replied firmly. "He said he doesn't understand what I'm talking about, which means he understands perfectly." Richard was confused. "What are you saying, Emily?" "Mr. Thompson, Mr. Ivanov just lied, and so did Dr. Mitchell." Dr. Mitchell slammed his hand on the table. "This is outrageous. You have no qualifications to question my professional translation." "Then let's put it to the test," Emily answered, her heart pounding. "Let's call the Russian embassy and ask someone there to confirm the translation of some parts of the contract." The silence that followed was deafening. Ivanov and Dr. Mitchell exchanged quick glances. "That's unnecessary," Dr. Mitchell said hastily. "We're wasting time on a young girl's paranoia with no experience." But Richard, who had built his empire by paying attention to details, began noticing the inconsistencies. Why was Dr. Mitchell so nervous about a simple verification? "Emily," Richard said slowly, "do you really speak Russian fluently?" "Yes, sir. My grandmother Catherine was Russian. She came to the United States in the 1950s and taught me from a young age. I've always dreamed of working in international trade." Richard looked at Mrs. Dorothy, who was leaning against the kitchen door, and then back at Emily. "Very well. Call the embassy." Dr. Mitchell tried to protest, but Richard had already made his decision. A few hours later, an official from the Russian embassy was on the line, confirming word for word what Emily had said about the contract's discrepancies. The embassy official explained in clear English that the Russian version contained clauses giving Ivanov total control of the company, including the right to fire all employees, sell the assets, and use the company's name for other ventures. Richard would receive only 20% of the agreed amount, and the rest would depend on an audit controlled by Ivanov himself. "This is impossible," Richard whispered, feeling his world collapse. "How could I have been so foolish?" Ivanov tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, but when Richard asked him to explain the discrepancies, the Russian couldn't give convincing answers. Dr. Mitchell played his last card. "Richard, you're being influenced by a girl who failed a job interview at your own company 2 years ago. She has personal reasons to sabotage your business." Dr. Mitchell's words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. It was true. She had applied for an administrative assistant position at Richard's company when she had to pause her studies. She'd been rejected for lacking experience. "It's true," Emily said, swallowing her tears. "I applied here 2 years ago and was turned down, but that doesn't change the fact you're being deceived." Richard looked at her with an expression Emily couldn't decipher. "Then why are you helping me? If I lose the company, you might even feel avenged." Emily took a deep breath. "Because my mother has worked here for 15 years, and you've always been fair to her. Because 50 families depend on this company to support their children, and because you don't deserve to be robbed even if you rejected me." Mrs. Dorothy, who had listened from the kitchen door, stepped closer to her daughter with tears in her eyes. "My daughter did the right thing, Mr. Richard. She's always had integrity, even when times were hard for us." It was then that Richard remembered something. 2 years earlier, when he'd rejected Emily for the job, she had sent him a detailed proposal on how the company could expand into international markets. He'd found the ideas interesting, but hadn't taken a young, inexperienced woman seriously. "Emily," Richard said slowly, "do you still have that proposal you sent me 2 years ago?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because now I understand I should have paid more attention." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Ivanov, realizing his plan had been exposed, tried one last emotional plea. "Richard, your father helped me greatly when I was a young businessman in Russia. I'm trying to repay the favor by buying your company at a fair price." Richard stopped, confused. His father had died 10 years earlier, but had never mentioned any contacts in Russia. "What help did my father give you?" "He lent me money when I was starting out, interest-free. It was an act of great generosity." Emily noticed Ivanov was lying again. She had studied the company's history when she applied for the job years before. Richard's father had been a simple man who worked his whole life as an accountant at a small local business. He never had money to lend to anyone, let alone Russian businessmen. "Mr. Ivanov," Emily said in Russian, "could you tell me the full name of Mr. Richard's father?" Ivanov hesitated. "Of course, it was John Thompson." "Wrong," Emily replied. "Mr. Richard's father was named Anthony Thompson, and he never left the United States." Richard looked at Emily with growing admiration. How did she know his father's name? "How do you know that?" "When I applied for the job, I researched everything about the company and your family. I wanted to impress during the interview. I read about how you inherited your passion for business from your father, Anthony, who worked as an accountant and always dreamed of having his own company." Richard fell silent for a moment, processing the information. His company, which had started as a small business importing basic goods, had become one of the largest in the industry in the state of New York. But now he was about to lose everything because of his own naivety. "Dr. Mitchell," Richard said, turning to the lawyer, "explain something to me. If Mr. Ivanov is as honest as you say, why did he lie about knowing my father?" Dr. Mitchell was visibly nervous, sweating even with the air conditioning on. "It must have been a cultural misunderstanding. Maybe he confused him with someone else." "Or maybe," Emily interrupted, "Mr. Ivanov has used this same story with other American businessmen. A quick internet search could show how many companies he's bought in recent years." Richard grabbed his phone and started searching. Within minutes, he found 3 articles from local newspapers about businessmen who had sold their companies to Ivanov for prices well below market value. In every case, Ivanov had claimed an emotional connection to the seller's family. "Son of a..." Richard began to swear, but caught himself in the presence of the women. "You both took me for a fool." Ivanov tried to leave the room, but Richard blocked the door. "No one leaves here until I fully understand what's going on." That's when Dr. Mitchell broke down. "Richard, I had no choice. I have debts. So many debts. I bet everything I had and lost. They threatened my family." "Who threatened you?" "The people I owe money to. Ivanov offered to pay my debts if I helped with the translation. I didn't want to hurt you, but I'm desperate." Richard felt a mix of anger and pity for the man he considered a friend. "How much do you owe?" $200,000. Richard looked at Emily, who had saved his company, and then at Dr. Mitchell, who had nearly destroyed it. "Mitchell, our friendship ends here, but I'll pay your debts because I've known your family for years. In return, you'll tell me everything about Ivanov's scheme." Dr. Mitchell, tears in his eyes, confessed that Ivanov had a network of contacts who identified American businessmen in financial trouble. They offered to buy the companies at seemingly fair prices, but the contracts in foreign languages contained clauses giving total control to the buyer. How many companies has he bought this way? 7, just in the United States, and he plans to expand to other countries in South America. Richard was shocked. He wasn't just a victim, he was part of a much bigger scheme. "Emily," Richard said, "can you help me understand exactly what the original contract says?" Emily spent the next 2 hours translating every line of the contract. Beyond the fraudulent clauses, she discovered that Ivanov intended to use Richard's company as a front to launder money of dubious origin. "Mr. Thompson," Emily said, "if you had signed this contract, you wouldn't have just lost your company. You could have been accused of participating in illegal activities without even knowing it." Richard sank heavily into his chair. In just a few hours, his entire outlook on life had changed. The young woman he had underestimated had saved not only his company, but possibly his freedom. "Ivanov," Richard said, turning to the Russian man who remained silent, "what do you have to say about this?" Ivanov tried to deny everything, but when Richard threatened to call the authorities, he finally confessed part of the truth. He said he was only trying to do business, but admitted that perhaps some aspects of the contract weren't clear enough. "Not clear enough?" Richard exploded. "You were trying to rob me." It was then that Emily had an idea. "Mr. Thompson, may I make a suggestion?" "Go ahead." "You need money to save the company, right? And you need someone who understands international markets. What if we looked for legitimate Russian businessmen who could form an honest partnership?" Richard looked at her with interest. "You know honest Russian businessmen? I know people in the Russian community in New York. My grandmother introduced me to several families who came here decades ago and built legitimate businesses. I can make some calls." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. In the days that followed, Emily worked tirelessly to help Richard. She contacted businessmen in the Russian community in New York, presented detailed proposals for legitimate partnerships, and even suggested changes to the company's structure that could improve efficiency. Mrs. Dorothy watched her daughter with pride and concern. "My dear, you're working too hard. What if Mr. Thompson decides he doesn't need you anymore after he solves his problems?" "Mom, I'm doing what I believe is right. If he lets me go afterward, at least I'll know I helped when he needed it." Emily's dedication didn't go unnoticed by Richard. He began to realize how much he had underestimated the people around him. Mrs. Dorothy, for example, wasn't just a cook. Over the years, she had observed how the company operated, knew the habits of every employee, and had valuable insights into what worked and what didn't. "Mrs. Dorothy," Richard said one day during lunch, "have you ever thought about doing more than just cooking?" "What do you mean, Mr. Thompson? You know this company better than many of my managers. You've noticed problems they don't see." Mrs. Dorothy was speechless. After 15 years working in the house, it was the first time Richard had asked for her opinion about the company. "Well, if you really want to know, I've always thought the company wastes a lot of materials, and some employees take advantage of you not always being around to slack off." Richard asked for examples, and Mrs. Dorothy gave precise details about waste and inefficiencies that cost thousands of dollars a month. Meanwhile, Emily managed to schedule a meeting with Viktor Sokolov, a Russian businessman who had lived in the United States for 20 years and had an impeccable reputation in the import market. Viktor was a man in his 60s with white hair and kind eyes. He had emigrated from Russia when he was young and built a solid company based on transparency and fair partnerships. "Richard," Viktor said during their first meeting, "Emily told me what happened with Ivanov. Unfortunately, I know his reputation. You were lucky to have someone who knew Russian to protect you." "I know. Now I realize how ungrateful I was to her." Viktor proposed a partnership where his company would provide contacts in Russia in exchange for a percentage of the import profits. Unlike Ivanov, Viktor presented contracts in English, with all clauses explained in detail. "Transparency is the foundation of any lasting business," Victor explained. "If anything isn't clear, ask. If you don't understand something, question it. Good business doesn't need haste or pressure." Victor's proposal wasn't just honest, it was far more advantageous for Richard. Instead of selling the company, he'd enter a partnership that could triple his profits in 2 years. But Richard still had one problem. He needed immediate capital to pay off his mounting debts. "Victor," Richard asked, "do you know any investors who could lend me money for working capital?" "I do, but I have a different proposal. My company can advance payments on some future contracts. That would give you the money you need without taking on more debt." It was exactly what Richard needed. For the first time in months, he saw light at the end of the tunnel, but one important question remained. What to do about Emily? Richard knew she had saved his company, and possibly his life, but she was still technically the cook's daughter with no completed degree and no official business experience. One morning, Richard called Emily into his office for a private conversation. "Emily, you saved my company. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Thompson. I just did what I thought was right. But I need to do something. You have a talent I wasted because of my own prejudice. I want to make you an offer." Emily waited nervously. "I want you to finish your degree. I'll cover all the costs, and I want you to work with me as an international relations assistant while you study." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. The company needs people like you, and you deserve a chance to show your potential." "What about my mother?" "Your mother will be promoted to head supervisor of the support staff. She knows this company better than any consultant I could hire." Emily began to cry. For 2 years, she had believed her life was over when she had to drop out of college. Now, not only could she finish her degree, but she'd also have the chance to work in the field she'd always dreamed of. "There's one condition," Richard said. "What?" "You'll have to put up with working with me every day, and I can be a tough boss." Emily smiled through her tears. "I think I can handle that." In the months that followed, Richard's company didn't just recover, it began to thrive like never before. The partnership with Victor brought new contracts from Russia and other Eastern European countries. Emily, working part-time while finishing her degree, showed a natural talent for international negotiations. Mrs. Dorothy, in her new role, implemented changes that saved tens of thousands of dollars in waste. Richard realized he had underestimated not just Emily, but many of the employees who had worked with him for years. One day, 6 months after the incident with Ivanov, Richard received an unexpected call. "Mr. Thompson, this is Detective Johnson. We have news about the Mr. Ivanov case." Richard tensed. "What kind of news?" "We've managed to track his activities. He was arrested trying to pull the same scam on a company in Chicago. His assistant's testimony was crucial in building the case against him." Richard looked over at Emily, who was across the room organizing documents for a meeting with European suppliers. "And Dr. Mitchell. He's cooperating with the investigation. Because of his cooperation and the fact that you paid his debts, he'll likely avoid jail time, but he'll have to do community service and won't be able to practice law for 2 years. Richard thanked the caller and hung up. Justice had been served, but he knew the most important thing was what he'd learned about himself and the people around him. That afternoon, Richard called a meeting with all the company employees. "Everyone," he began, "you know we went through a difficult time a few months ago. I want to share with you how we overcame that crisis and what I learned in the process." He told the whole story, from the attempted scam to how Emily and Mrs. Dorothy had helped save the company. When he finished, everyone applauded. "Starting today," Richard continued, "we're making important changes. First, we're creating a suggestion program where everyone can propose improvements. Second, we're investing in education for employees who want to grow. And third, we'll be more transparent about how the company operates." An accounting employee raised her hand. "Mr. Richard, does that mean we can speak up when we see problems?" "Not just can, you must. If Emily hadn't had the courage to speak up, I probably would have lost everything." In the following months, the company transformed. Employees who once just followed orders began contributing ideas. Productivity rose, waste decreased, and the work environment improved dramatically. Emily quickly excelled in her new role. Not only did she speak Russian, but she was also learning other languages and developing a deep understanding of international markets. Victor became her mentor, sharing decades of experience in global business. "Emily," Victor said one day, "you have a gift for understanding people. That's more important than speaking languages or knowing regulations." "How so?" "In business, especially international business, you need to read between the lines. You have to sense when someone's lying, when they're nervous, when they're hiding something. You did that instinctively with Ivanov." Emily reflected on Victor's words. She really had sensed something was wrong, even before fully understanding the scheme. "I think I learned that from taking care of my mother," she replied. "When someone you love is suffering, you learn to pay attention to the details." A year after the incident, Richard threw a party to celebrate the company's best financial results ever. During the celebration, he made a special toast. "I want to thank two people who changed my life and this company's future," he said, raising his glass. "Mrs. Dorothy, who worked with dedication for 15 years and now helps us become more efficient every day. And Emily, who had the courage to speak the truth when no one wanted to listen." Everyone applauded, but Richard wasn't finished. "Emily, you're graduating next month. I'd like to make you an official offer. Will you be our Director of International Relations?" Silence filled the room. It was a huge promotion for someone who had started as the cook's daughter. "Mr. Richard," Emily said, visibly moved, "it's an honor. I accept, but on one condition." "What's that?" "I want my mother to be officially recognized as an operational efficiency consultant. She knows more about how this company works than any of us." Richard smiled. "I accept the condition." Mrs. Dorothy began to cry. At 61 years old, for the first time in her life, she would be recognized not just for her manual labor, but for her intelligence and experience. 2 years later, Richard's company had tripled in size. They had contracts in 12 countries and a solid reputation in the international market. Emily, now graduated and with hands-on experience, was respected by foreign partners as a skilled and trustworthy negotiator. Victor, who had practically become a member of the family, often joked that Richard had won the lottery when he was nearly swindled by Ivanov. "If you hadn't gone through that crisis," Victor said one day, "you'd never have discovered the talents right under your nose." Richard agreed. The attempted scam, which could have ruined his life, ended up being the best thing that ever happened to him. One afternoon, Richard was in his office when he received an unexpected visitor. It was a businessman from Chicago, the same man who had been Ivanov's next target. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, "I came in person to thank you. If it weren't for your testimony and your assistance, I would have fallen for the same scam." "How did you hear about our story?" "The business community is small. When I found out Ivanov had tried to cheat me, I looked into it and discovered he'd attempted the same with you. Your assistant Emily gave me tips on how to spot fraudulent contracts." Richard smiled with pride. Emily hadn't just saved his company, she was helping other business owners protect themselves from similar scams. "She's special," Richard said. "She has a sense of justice you don't often find." End of story. And what did you think of this incredible twist? Could you have imagined the cook's daughter would save an empire? Share your thoughts in the comments about Emily's courage and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.